How's everybody doing today? Good. Well, all right. Thank you so much for coming out here. I really appreciate it. My name is Peter Levis, but I'm nicknamed Peter the Patriot. I'm dressed up after a Minuteman from the American Revolution, which would serve between the years of 1775 and 1781 during the American Revolution. I'd like to give you just a brief background of how the war started and why did it start and all the fighting and all that. 1763, King George came to the throne with a new agenda on his mind to pass certain taxes in the colonies because of the French and Indian War. In 1765, the Stamp Act came out, and this Stamp Act was to tax anything that was a printed good. So papers, bills, newspapers, letters, all that was taxed. And none of that went through the legislatures in the colonies. It just became so in Parliament and with the king. Well, 1766, thankfully, that tax was repealed. But do you know that tax varied from 20 to 30% tax on some of those printed goods? 20 to 30% tax, just like that, without your approval. So in 1766, that, oh, come on in, was repealed. But in 1766, a new act came out that King George passed called the Declaratory Act. And the Declaratory Act simply stated that Parliament had the right to bind the colonies in all cases whatsoever. That don't sound too good, does it? Because there goes their own self-government. Because something that the colonists believed in very dearly was that the English Constitution should be upheld and respected the same in the colonies as in England. Because they're all underneath the same crown. So wouldn't that make sense to have the same laws and regulations be the same in the colonies as it is in England? Well, that wasn't happening. So 1766, that came to be. Several years later on, of course, more acts came up and more taxation. In 1773, you had the Boston Tea Party, which the Boston Tea Party, there's this particular tax on tea. That was an outrageous tax of up to 35% tax on this tea. But the way that it was happening was from the West India Company, which British had its hands, or the British had their hands in. They didn't want to have the colonies buy or sell any other goods to other countries. The British just wanted them to buy and sell from British only. So with that happening, the British would put their price onto whatever goods. And they would jack these prices way up. The colonists in Boston, the Sons of Liberty, saw the problem. And this is, again, just a brief summary of everything leading up to the war. They wanted those chests of tea sent back to Britain. They did not want to pay that outrageous tax on these chests of tea. Well, Royal Governor Hutchinson of Boston said no, that they were going to have to pay that. Well, it was in December of the same year, some young men around about my age, Sons of Liberty, dressed, having war paint on their face, and some Indian tails, or just Indian feathers, and just stuff like that to disguise themselves as Indians. And there's a group of them. They boarded the ship in the harbor. They broke open the chest of tea and dumped the contents overboard. They didn't fight anybody, nor did they burn the ship down and burn the town down, nothing like that. They just wanted to make their point clear they were not going to pay taxes on this tea. They actually had this little rhyme that they went about saying was, "Rally Mohawks, bring out your axes, tell King George we'll pay no taxes." Well, of course this sparked a lot in Parliament. Now they just lost a ton of money in that tea. Well, later on, Boston was put underneath military parole. And now they lost every constitutional right guaranteed to them in the English Constitution. So now Boston was all bottled up underneath British control with standing armies now in Boston from the British that actually came there in the year 1768. So British armies were already in the colonies during a quote-unquote peacetime. So that was a big problem that the colonists also saw, because Patrick Henry, as you will hear more about later, said, why is there standing armies during this peacetime? Because there's no other enemy except us, the British. Actually, we'll go right into that right now. So March 23rd of 1775, Virginia, at the House of Burgesses in Richmond, Patrick Henry, who was a statesman, gave this stirring address, only about 8 minutes in length, to just say the obvious of what everybody was thinking, but everybody was so afraid to say this, because, if you're caught speaking out against the crown, you could be tried for treason, and perhaps even hanged, maybe with your own family. So those were the fears that the British were putting on top of the Commons. But this is Patrick Henry, in his own words, giving his speech that everybody knows as the "Give me liberty or give me death" speech. No man thinks more highly than I do of the patriotism, as well as the abilities of the very worthy gentlemen who have just addressed the House. But different men often see the same subject in different light, and therefore I hope will not be thought disrespectful of me, entertaining as I do opinions of very opposite character to theirs. I shall speak forth my sentiments freely and without reserve. This is no time for ceremony. The question before the House is one of an awful moment to this country, and for my own part I consider it nothing less than a question of freedom or slavery, and in proportion to the magnitude of the subject ought to be the freedom of the debate. It is only this way that we can hope to revive the truth and fulfill the great responsibility which we hold to God and country. Shall I keep back my opinion at such a time, through fear of giving offense? I should consider myself as guilty of treason towards my own country, and of an act of disloyalty to the majesty of heaven, which I revere above all earthly kings. Mr. President, it is natural for man to indulge himself in the illusions of hope. We are apt to shut our eyes against a painful truth, and listen to the song of that siren until she transforms us into beasts. Is this the part of wise men, engaged in a great and arduous struggle for liberty? Are we disposed to the number of those who, having eyes, see not, having ears, hear not, the things which so nearly concern their temporal salvation? For my own part, I consider nothing less than the question of freedom or slavery, and I am willing to know the whole truth, to know the worst of it, and to provide for it. I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that is a lamp of experience. I know of no way of judging the future but by the past, and by judging the past, I wish to know what has been in the conduct of the British ministry for the last 10 years to justify these hopes with which people have been pleased to solace themselves in the House. Is it that insidious smile which we have been lately received? Trust it not, sir. It will prove a snare to your feet. Suffer not yourselves to be betrayed with a kiss. Ask yourselves how this gracious reception of our petition comports with these warlike preparations which cover our waters and darken our lands. Are fleets and armies necessary to the works of love and reconciliation? Have we shown ourselves so unwilling to be reconciled with that force must be called in to win back our love? Let us not deceive ourselves, sir. These are the implements of war and subjugation, the last arguments to which kings resort. I ask, gentlemen, sir, what means this martial array? If its purpose be not to force it to submission, can gentlemen assign any other possible motive for it? Has Great Britain any enemy in this quarter of the world to call for all this accumulation of navies and armies? No, sir. She has none. They are meant for us. They are meant for no other. They are sent over to bind and rivet upon us those chains which the British ministry have been so long forging. And what have we to oppose then? Shall we try argument? Sir, we've been trying that for the last 10 years. Have we anything new to offer upon the subject? Nothing. We have held this subject up in every light of which it is capable, but it has been all in vain. Shall we resort to entreaty and humble supplication? What terms shall we find which have not been already exhausted? Let us not, I beseech you, sir, deceive ourselves. Sir, we have done everything that could be done to avert the storm which is now coming on. We have petitioned, we have remonstrated, we have supplicated, we have prostrated ourselves before the throne, and have implored its interposition to arrest the tyrannical hands of the ministry and parliament. Our petitions have been slighted. Our remonstrances have produced additional insult and violence, and we've been spurred with contempt for the foot of the throne. In vain after these things may we indulge in the fond hope of peace and reconciliation, when there is no longer any room for hope. If we wish to be free, if we mean to preserve and violate those inestimable privileges for which we've been so long contending, if we mean not basely to abandon the noble struggle in which we've been so long engaged, and never to abandon until the glorious object of our contest shall be obtained, we must fight. I repeat it, sir, we must fight, and appeal to arms of the God of hosts. It's all that is left for us. They tell us, sir, that we are weak. unable to cope with so formidable of an adversary. But when shall we be stronger? Will it be the next week or the next year? Or will it be when we are totally disarmed, and when a British guard shall be stationed in every house? Shall we gather strength by irresolution in inaction? Shall we acquire the means of effectual resistance by lying supinely on our backs, hugging to the delusive phantom of hope until our enemy shall have bound us hand and foot? Sir, we are not weak if we make a proper use of those means which the God of nature hath placed in our power. The millions of people are armed in the holy cause of liberty, and in such a country as that which we possess are invincible by any force that the enemy can send against us. Besides, sir, the battle is not to the strong alone. It is to the vigilant, the active, the brave. Besides, sir, we have no election. If we are base enough to desire it, it is now too late to retire from the contest. There is no retreat but in submission and slavery. Our chains are forged. Their clanking may be heard on the plains of Boston. The war is inevitable. Let it come. I repeat, sir, let it come. It is in vain to extenuate the matter. Gentlemen may cry, peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war has actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stay we here idle? What is it that gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. In the words of Patrick Henry. Shortly after that, April 18th, 1775, thanks to the Sons of Liberty and being informed that there will be a British military movement to not only capture their arms and munitions stored in Lexington and Concord, where the militia were getting ready, knowing that a war was coming, but the British had another plan. Do you know what else the British were planning to do besides capture like firearms and take away gunpowder and lead and stuff like that? Any thoughts or suggestions? Ideas? Or I'll tell you. So the Sons of Liberty, British were seeking out Samuel Adams, John Hancock. More than likely, if they were captured, they would have been brought to a trial without jury, a military trial, and would have been found guilty of treason and hanged. But April 18, 1775, the Sons of Liberty thought it would be best when they found the intelligence of how the British were going to make a military move. See, Boston, has a harbor going around it. They thought the British were either going to go by land, which would take several days to get to Lexington and Concord, or, well, not several days, but just longer, maybe a day or half a day, or go by sea, cross the bay directly into Cambridge, actually, and start a march to Lexington and Concord. Depending on how the British would do it, it would be really quick for an engagement, or perhaps later on for a military engagement. Well, they thought it would be best, April 18, 1775, at the Old North Church in Boston, which was the tallest building in Boston, about 130 feet for the steeple, to have a lantern. One if by land, two if by sea. That is actually Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's poem of Paul Revere's The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. That's where that comes from. But that was actually what happened. So, one if by land, two if by sea. Well, there's two lanterns. So not only Paul Revere, but Samuel Hutchinson, I believe, and one other writer. There were several writers besides Paul Revere that wrote out warning the countryside. You know that Paul Revere was actually captured before he even got to Lexington or Concord? He was captured by the British, and somehow miraculously, he was released by the British. But it was the other writers that wrote out warning the countryside. Of who were coming? The British, or the regulars, which were the British regular troops. April 19, 1775, at Lexington, John Parker, the commander of the militia, which I'm dressed after. Militia is pretty much, let's say Jacksonville, this is the year 1775, and say Jacksonville was under attack by the British regulars. The guys like me, any able-bodied man, to take up arms, go form the militia, and take a stand against the enemy. Volunteer. So John Parker, the commander of the militia, told his men to stand your ground. Don't fire unless fired upon, but if they mean to have war, let it begin here. The British came. They told the militia, the American militia, to lay down your arms and disperse. Why stand you here? But they stood their ground. All of a sudden, after they felt the American militia made their point clear, a fire or a shot rang out. Somebody fired, which caused the British to open fire onto the militia without giving a particular order from the military, from the British military. So they opened fire without giving order to do so, which caused the militia to fire back and to sort of scatter. Later on the same day in Concord at the Old North Bridge, the British were found there tearing up the bridge to try to stop militia American movements. And it was there where the British side and the American side were given the official orders to open fire upon each other. Thus, the American Revolution began in Massachusetts. It wasn't until later on that it spread to all the colonies. And of course, you would have the Declaration of Independence, 1776, July the 4th, 1776, the unanimous Declaration of Independence, bringing the colonies together as one country, but still as states. But we'll jump up to the year 1777, June the 14th of 1777, which June the 14th is tomorrow. The Second Continental Congress met and adopted this flag as their official flag of the country, with 13 stripes alternating red and white, and a blue union with 13 stars representing a new constellation. This would be nicknamed the Betsy Ross flag, because legend has it that she helped with the design, and legend had it that George Washington wanted a 6-pointed star to represent the Star of David. But again, legend has it that Betsy Ross said that would be too much sewing, so they went with 5. But as you can see, there's 13 stars in a blue union with 13 stripes. On the current flag, there are still 13 stripes. That represents the first 13 states of America. That is why it's so long. So you have red, white, and blue. Do you know what the colors represent? Have you ever thought what they represent? Because everything in this flag, there's a meaning behind it. So the colors, red representing courage, because in order to have courage, men have to stand up in defense of their home, their family, or their country. Often bloodshed is required in the unfortunate defense of the country. But that's taking up courage and taking a stand. So you have red, white, represents purity, as I'll talk in just a little bit more about a little bit later on, purity. And blue, representing justice, is what blue represents. Do you know why all the stars are of equal size? You want to take a guess why they are all equal? What do you think? Think of them as states. Each state is equal to another state. No state is greater than the other. But they are in a blue union, representing their unity together as one nation. So that's why they are all of equal size. So, of course, you have that flag. And previously to that one, I'm sorry, I went a little bit out of order. I think everybody knows this flag here. Oh, let me hold it. There we go. Don't tread on me with a rattlesnake. This was nicknamed the Gadsden flag of the man who designed it, but it was also inspired by Benjamin Franklin, because during the days when Britain was sending colonists over, they would often send criminals to help colonize America. Naturally, criminals stayed criminals. So Benjamin Franklin thought, well, let's send them back barrels of rattlesnakes as a sarcastic thank you back to Britain. So that's why they thought of perhaps having a rattlesnake as their flag on here. Don't tread on me, or it can be said in this way, interfere with our liberty at your peril. So that would be that flag. And then, of course, it's already been mentioned, our current flag, now 50 stars, still 13 stripes, still the same colors. This doesn't ever need to be changed. Just to say that, because it represents America at its founding. Don't need to be changing colors. It don't need to be changing stripes, nor the amount of stars or size or anything. It stays original. I just have to give my 2 cents about that. And to go a little bit further, just to say, like, when people today give the Pledge of Allegiance, I often hear it. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. There's no enthusiasm. When giving the Pledge of Allegiance, there needs to be some, and this is just something that I just have witnessed a lot from going to a lot of different patriotic events in schools. You know what this flag represents as well? It represents the country, but it represents everybody who has fought and died for this country, which is roughly 1,190,000 plus veterans from the American Revolutionary War to present. So that's what that flag represents, is men and women that aren't around here anymore to preserve our nation. And that's something that, of course, isn't taught in schools today, but then also something that I'd like to bring out to kids. And just to tell you a little bit more what I do, when I go up to kids, I explain to them, I give them a little flag, and I ask them, you know what this is? And, tell them about the stars, the stripes, and all that type of thing. But I tell them, or I ask them, are you an American? And it's funny because sometimes they have to think. And then their parents usually says, yeah, you're an American. So I tell them, you know what that means? This flag represents you as an American. That's why you want to respect it. But sometimes it's just that much that all a kid needs to understand that. But unfortunately, it's not taught so often today. But I do want to tie this in. Well, let me stop. We'll take a quick pause with this. I know we have one veteran. Is there any other veterans out there that would like to just raise your hand? All right. Well, thank you so much for your service. I appreciate it. And thank you for coming out here today. But I want to expand more upon the color white in the flag. Do you know what patriotism is defined as? In general, you hear this love of the country, but word for word from Noah Webster's Dictionary of 1828, patriotism is defined as this. Patriotism is the love of one's country, the passion which aims to serve one's country, either defending it from invasion or maintaining its laws and institutions in vigor and purity. Patriotism is the characteristic of a good citizen, the noblest passion that animates a man in the character of a citizen. Do you know where purity and good come from? Where's the basis? Where's the standard? Because let's just say, I could say this, if I give you a rough estimate of 12 inches, 1 foot, okay, around about there. Somebody else has that and, just goes everywhere. There's got to be a standard. The same thing works when it comes to government and having good government specifically. Romans chapter 13 in the Bible states that government is supposed to uphold what is good and protect it, suppress evil, and punish it. You know that all good government comes from this verse in Genesis. I'm talking about good government, though, what government's supposed to do. Genesis 9, verse 6, it says this, that if any man sheds another man's blood, his own blood is to be shed. That is capital punishment. Because there is sin in the world, that is why there is war, because there is sin. But what can we do? Of course you defend your home and your family and your country, but where is the hope? Where do you put your hope and trust in? Can I put it in myself? I can, but may I ask you an important question? Will it last in me eternally? No, it won't. Matthew chapter 5 says this. It talks about the man who built his house on sand and a man who built his house on a rock. What happened to both of those men? Do you know what happened? Both had storms, but only one stood. As we go through life, we're going to have trials and tribulation. That's what the Bible says. But that I find is a very key example as well in the sense of a nation. If a nation is built on sand, is a nation going to stand? No. God has his place in a nation, and specifically when he is the governor over everything. He is the ruler over everything. So if people don't have this understanding of knowing where true freedom comes from, because we might know freedom from tyranny, just like as the American fathers or American founding fathers fought for, but they also had this key element which gave them the strength and courage to fight. Because you think about this, it's not often taught. What gave them strength and courage to fight, knowing they were going up against every odds of the British? The British had all their muskets, they had their bayonets, they had well-dressed troops, well-trained troops, well-seasoned troops coming from the French and American War. They had money, they had tea, they had everything. The Americans, you have your farmers, you have your men just out in the fields and all that. They didn't have much lead, they didn't have much money, they didn't have all that stuff. But they had one thing that the British lacked, and that was faith and trust in the Lord. That's the thing that the Americans had that put them aside, as it made them different. And what gave them that strength? Well, let me say it this way. If you know where you're going when you die, do you have anything to fear? No. You do not, coming from the Bible. For this reason, Matthew 10, verse 28 says this, "Fear not them that can kill the body, but fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell." Because Jesus Christ gave us life, liberty, and happiness. Those are unalienable rights endowed by our Creator, just like what it says in the Declaration. But in order to have liberty and happiness, you have to have life first. But that life that Jesus talks about is life in Him. Because when you have that absolute trust and an absolute unconditional surrender to the Lord, you will have a peace that passes all understanding. And I believe these guys did. Because they could march out into battle knowing that they might not come home with maybe 3 to 4 rounds apiece going up against the military with everything. They knew where they were going. And look what happened. They won because they had their trust in the Lord. So I want to read you this just in closing and give some. Are we okay on time? Okay. We're good?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to read you this passage here that just really, it means a lot to me. And perhaps most of you know this. Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 18. "Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of His might." Does it say your might? It says His might. "Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against the powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore take unto you the whole armor of God." Don't pick and choose the whole armor of God and expect the same result. Because you will not get the same result if you say, well, I'll put my shoes of peace on today, but I'm not taking my shield of faith. And it doesn't work that way. It won't work well. So, "Wherefore take unto you the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. Stand, therefore, having your loins girt about with truth, and having on the breastplate of righteousness, and your feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Above all, taking the shield of faith, wherewith ye shall be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, praying always with all prayer and supplication in spirit." So now you know more about what that color white in the American flag represents when it's talking about purity. Because what happens when you ask Christ in as your Lord and Savior in your life? You ask Him in and you call out in His name. It says in His Word that your sins will be washed white as snow. Purity. So now you know. And I hope you've made that decision already. And if you have not, I'd love to talk to you more about it. But I would like to open this time to anybody that has any questions about, it can be maybe something I didn't go over, or maybe just something just about me, or just anything you got. This is your time. I'm here for all of you. And any questions, feel free to ask. Anybody at all? Oh, yes, sir.
We know that history is living, and from the perspective of history, I am a cousin of Patrick Henry, therefore he is family.
Oh, okay.
And so the words you recite and the things you tell us are true then and now.
That is very, yes.
And we have to be careful to remember
That is very true. Oh, come on through. You're fine, man. You got to come right on through. I agree. And that's something that unfortunately a lot of people don't talk about or don't even mention. And they just look at it as like, no, that's what you said and that's it. But yeah, they're always applicable. And that's something that, like doing Patrick Henry, or I do other character impressions and things, I always try to, me personally, this is how I think, to put myself in their shoes and try to represent that all correctly. Because I feel the same with what he's talking about, but in relation to today. Because it's unfortunate. A lot of times nations do not fall from without, but they fall from within. And the devil knows that. And that's why he works very hard in what he does. That's why you got to have that whole armor of God.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions about anything? Did you have one before? Or? Okay. All right. I know somebody's got something. Maybe while you're thinking, I'll tell you this. So, this is a 1730 model Brown Bess musket. This would have been a standard firearm for both the Americans and the British. So, this is a flintlock. So, the way a flintlock works, there's a rock right here, a little flint, that's carved out to just a fine point. And this is called a frizzen. So, let's say I'm not really loading it. I pull out a little paper cylinder that has a pre-measured amount of powder. I rip it off, and a lot of times, like the war between the states, the Civil War, and the American Revolution, you have to have at least 2 teeth. So you can rip that off, pour it down the muzzle, you take that paper, shove it down there. I take my ramrod out, pack that in, I take my bullet, which they just say musket ball. Oh, come on through, man. If you need to come on through, you're fine. Yeah, you just come right on through. You take your bullet and put it down in there, and you pack that as well. So, I'm sorry, I actually missed a step. With that same powder, I would have put a little right here in this pan. Then I would have done all that. So I flip that down, and I cock this to a full cock. Now I'm ready to fire. So once this flint strikes the frizzen, you flip it open and send sparks into the powder pan, which there's a little breech hole in the barrel right there. There's a little pinhole, which that would ignite the rest of the powder in the chamber, thus, fire your musket ball. Well, you're doing all that while you're getting shot at. So if you're a really, really good musketman, you can fire 2 shots a minute. So pretty much every 30 seconds if you're really good. This is a 75 caliber round. Almost 1.5 ounces of lead. If maybe some of you guys are like hunters or things like that, a 12 gauge slug, this is slightly bigger than a 12 gauge slug from a shotgun. So, and a low velocity as well. It's not like a high powered round that just pierce and go right through. It would hit, it might get lodged, or if you're close enough, it might go through and leave a really big exit wound. Or if it hit you in a limb, you have a compound fracture, which would probably be amputation. You might bleed to death, and if you live through all that, you'll probably get gangrene and still won't make it. So it was a very brutal thing, not to mention starvation, at that time as well. So, here's the bayonet. Do you know what the bayonet was originally designed for? It's a little gruesome. It wasn't for other guys. It was designed originally for a cavalry charge. So, way back when, you'd have these war horses that they were trained to just run and do not stop, unless the rider tells them to. So, they would have pikemen and then riflemen. Well, around about early 1700s, they thought in bayonet France, where this is called a bayonet, where it was invented, that, let's try to put, a spear on the end of the musket, where now you don't have pikemen and a rifleman. They're the same unit. So if there's a cavalry charge, you'd have fixed bayonet. You'd take this and you would thrust it into the horse's chest, which would make the rider fall off violently. Then you'd finish off the rider. But that's what a bayonet was originally invented for. And a bayonet might be a little bit hard to see, but the design of it is triangular shaped. This makes a wound that you can't stitch back together, nor does it heal easily. So like the Geneva Convention and all that stuff where, they outlawed all that thing or all those things, bayonets aren't made like this. But bad guys don't listen to the Geneva Convention anyways. Just a second. I don't know the last time that a terrorist listened to the Geneva Convention. That doesn't happen. So, anyways, there's a little bit about the musket, and there's a little bit about me. I'm just dressed in normal colonial clothes. Got the call. The British are coming. I'm going to grab my essentials. I got a pistol. I got a tomahawk. Say if I had a hunting rifle that did not have a bayonet, more than likely I'd have a tomahawk for close combat. I got my bags, got my powder, maybe have a little bit of meal of some kind or some meat or just something. And that's about it. Do you know why I have a tail in my hat? There is a reason. It's not just for looks. The reason would be that in South Carolina specifically, where there was loyalists were men and women that were still dedicated to the crown. If you were a patriot or an American, or just to say, they called themselves Republicans in South Carolina. So if you were a patriot or Republican for breaking away, more than likely you had a tail or a feather in your hat. So they knew what side you were on automatically. So, but if I was a loyalist, no tail, no feather in my hat. And that little moon represents the South Carolina moon, like in their state flag today. So I'll be styled after South Carolina militia. Any other questions or anything? So I have something to give all of you who came today, but I still want to give anybody some time for questions. Would you like to help hand some things out, man?
Sure.
This is a little booklet. These are no longer in print from the Alabama State Veterans Department, Veterans Affairs. But these are printed in 2003, and they don't make them anymore. So just as something for you to keep, it talks about a lot of things that I covered, just the meaning behind the flags and just the stars and stripes and just how to take care of it. But I wanted to pass some of these out all to you. So I head down. Oh, yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. I have been to the Bourbon Museum. That is a great place to go to. There's plenty for it. Yep. There it is. Yes, sir. Oh, you're very welcome.
I see y'all tomorrow. Bye.
Yes, sir. Here you go, man.
Oh, the hairdresser.
She's leaving.
Oh, she's ready to go, wasn't she?
Well, that's
what we got.
everything I got for you today. Unless you have any questions, I'll be hanging around for a little bit. But thank you so much for coming out. I enjoyed it. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to come out and speak today. So, but I'll be hanging around for a little bit. If anything else. Thank you very much.
Peter.